what came next was the movie. And so we premiered the movie, The $50 Billion Man, at the Curzon Theater in Mayfair. To be honest, I had a really hard time getting Dan Pena there. You know, he was really hard to get in the damn theater. And I was like, Dan, it's your goddamn premiere. And he was like, I don't want to go, I'm too busy. And I was just like, it was like the last minute he finally agreed to go. So again, it's never easy dealing with Dan, but I love the guy, and he came to the theater. We had it at Curzon Mayfair. We played the movie, including that final speech where people see Dan and they're like, you know what, maybe he has a heart. And then after the movie was over, I went on stage for a Q&A, and Dan proceeded to show the whole theater that he was not a loving, emotional guy, that he was the nastiest cunt you'd ever seen in your life. And he proceeded to tell the whole theater that they were useless. They should have they should have slid down their mama's leg. They should have never been born. He just told everyone that. People walked out of the theater. I did not know this was coming. It was his shock and awe campaign. And this is also where the very famous and infamous global warming clip comes from. So there was a woman in the audience who had had about 16 drinks, and she got up. She was from Australia, and I think she was a friend of someone, so she didn't know who Dan was. And he said, Dan, you're rich, and you got money. And she asked him about global warming, and then she kind of wouldn't let him answer the question. She kept like berating him. And so he's like, let me answer the question. And he yells at her. Then there was another woman in the front row that was a Dan supporter, and she was going to beat up the other lady. I mean, it was really tense that night. If you want, watch the Q&A. Again, it's on our website. Dan's chair breaks at one point, and he falls on the floor. Wood splinters everywhere. I mean, you can't make this shit up. You can't. And literally, I had people walking out. I thought we'd have a riot at some point. I mean, people were crying. It was crazy. So Dan went on to, of course, alienate the whole audience and tell them that they were doing everything they could be. And the next day, I remember in the studio, I was sitting there with my director and some people at London Real. Some were still crying. And they said he ruined it. The movie made him human, and then he did the Q&A, and it made him inhuman. And Luis and I said, it was actually perfect, because that's what Dan does. Dan does what you don't want him to do. He does what you don't expect him to do. And he makes you upset when you want him to say something nice. And so we thought it was somehow poetic and the perfect end to the night, even though it was very uncomfortable. And so I want to play for you the global warming clip that went super viral. This clip has been watched over 25 million times. For the record, I don't share Dan's views on global warming, but I also like a healthy discussion on global warming. And the world is quite divided because people don't necessarily believe people's statistics, and I think there's an agenda on both sides sometimes. So I want to continue this discussion, but this one went really famous. I think there's something we should do about it scientifically, but I also think Dan articulates his point in a very good way. So here's Dan talking about global warming.
Dan, you got the money, okay?
I got a few, Bob, yeah.
Okay, you support Trump? You do?
Yep.
Okay.
I was one of the first endorsers, public endorsers of President Trump.
What are you guys going to do when our ocean level rises?
Thank you for asking that question. I have the answer.
Don't let me finish.
I have the answer.
Let me finish.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah. Okay.
For the first time on Earth, we're changing the gas.
Now you're full of shit. Sit down. I'm going to answer you. I'm going to just
Dan.
shut up and sit down.
No way.
Sit down.
No, I got to finish my question.
I'm going to answer global warming.
All right, finish the question, then answer.
It's changing on Earth, and it's changing to CO2. What do you people with the money, what are you doing about this? Because
I'm going to tell you right now.
No, I've got children. I've got 21, 23-year-old children. And what's their future with you people with money? You talk about money all of the time.
Okay. Sit down, please. Sit down, please. In the front row. Excuse me. In the front row. Please sit down. Okay, you've asked your question. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm gonna answer.
Excuse me, ma'am. Will you please sit down? Please.
Thank you.
That's okay. Please sit down. Let him answer.
Okay. In 2011, my wife and I were in Antarctica, renewing our vows. For most of you that don't know, Antarctica's on a mountaintop. Okay. And there is a $500 million facility, scientific facility there, and the scientists came to give us presentations about global warming. And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said, 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And, oh, wait, stop. And he said, and I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things that the young woman alluded to? Okay. And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, of the 13.8 billion years that we've been on this miserable planet, it's not a fart in the wind. And as I told Joe Rogan on his show, and he said in his infinite wisdom, and Joe, if you hear this, I thank you for the opportunity of being on your show. He said, then in 25,000 years, it's most likely not going to be a problem. Now, my direct answer to your question, if that were really true, which you believe, and let's just for a moment say that it is true, that means that the best scenario vis-a-vis global warming is about 10 feet raise in water. That's the best scenario over the next 40, 50 years. That's the best scenario. The worst scenario is about 100 feet. But let's just take the 10 feet. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. And I can go, most of Central America is gone. Okay. If that's the case, let's just take Florida, for example, which is one of the fastest growing beachfront condominiums on the planet. In the prospectus, when you invest, there should be, in the footnotes, if global warming is for real, they won't put it that way, global warming happens and water rises 10 feet, this investment you made is fuck all. Not one single investment prospectus written since 2000, this century, has alluded to global warming. Not one motherfucker. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one motherfucking condominium. So the people that have the money, and I'm jealous of the Vice President, Gore, which Sally and I rode on a plane from South America with a few years ago. I am jealous he came up with a scam before I did. Because the financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you couldn't get a goddamn loan in London. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. Is Barclays Bank going to give you a motherfucking loan? With the greatest respect, ma'am, it's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.
And the debate shall continue about global warming. If you've seen our latest movie, Reconnect, you know that a lot of people disagree with Dan's thoughts on this, but I think we should go to the science. We should continue this discussion and hopefully work together on solving this problem. And again, what we're trying to do here on London Real is get everyone's views out there. And that's Dan's. Like I said, I don't agree with him on this stuff, but he does articulate some interesting points. And I think that's why this clip is done so well. And not to mention the fact that he's on a stage and yelling at someone as well, in typical Dan fortune.